Kailua artist Kenyatta Kelechi explores his connection to community, culture, and place through the 19th century technique of wet plate collodion photography. This labor-intensive process requires careful preparation and presence, allowing him to work intentionally and build meaningful connections with the practitioners he photographs.
Second exposure. So you guys gotta stay still for 1 second. Got it? My name's Kenyatta Kelechi, and I'm from Kailua, Hawaii. I got my first camera given to me from my dad, and I was in 9th grade, and I took photography class. There was a dark room, and I kind of just didn't realize that I was going to be a photographer one day. I wasn't planning on being a photographer. I was originally in pre-engineering school or something like that. I was taking a lot of math and science classes, and then took this darkroom photography class, possibly get an A, bring my GPA up. But it ended up being really challenging and fun. The professor at the time, his name was Stan Tamita, became a mentor figure in a way. And he was always really hard to impress. I would make a print and it'd come out and he'd look at it, and even though I thought it was the best print I ever made, and I'm proud, I walk it out on the little food tray to show him, and he's like, oh, too dark. I was like, oh, gotta go back in the darkroom again. So it was fun because it was a challenge. I enjoyed those moments. When he retired, I needed something to challenge me, and that's what led me into wet plate. I wanted something that had a lot of steps in it, like a real process you had to be really involved in. The main chemical in wet plate collodion is collodion. And I think collodion is just ether and gun cotton. And its job is just to bind silver nitrate, which is what is light sensitive, to the plate. I pour it onto my plate, and then I'll put it into this thing called the silver bath. And it sits in there for 3 to 5 minutes, and while it's in there in the dark, the plate's becoming sensitized. So after that happens, every time I handle it, it has to be in my dark box, away from direct light, because it's light sensitive now. And then I take the picture and expose the plate, and then I put the plate into the dark box and I develop it in there. And then after that, I rinse it outside and fix it. And the cool thing about wet plate is I think it's the only process where you can see the negative flip to positive in daylight. So in pretty much every other photographic process, you have to do all that in the darkroom. So you don't really see it the same way you do with wet plate. It's really bright, and you can see all of the particles kind of change. It's almost like magic. It looks really cool. That's my favorite part. And seeing other people's reactions when they see that, it's the coolest part about wet plate. It took me forever to really get wet plate dialed in. The picture that kind of put me on the path that I'm on now was this portrait that I made in 2019 of this band called Pulmona. They're from Kailua, and originally it was Auntie Irmgard and her 2 daughters, but now it's the 2 daughters and one of Auntie Irmgard's grandchildren. They're really tied to Kailua, and I'm from Kailua, and it was everything kind of lined up conceptually. It looks good, it feels good. It felt like I was participating in something, or participating with someone that meant something to me. Because I just remember making the photograph, and I'm in my dark box, and they're playing music, and I'm getting chicken skin while I'm trying to pour this plate because the song's so beautiful, and oh, I don't want to mess up the plate. So the plate has all kinds of weird aberrations and flaws on it because I was so nervous when I was making it. But it reminds me of that moment when I see it. Wet plate kind of ended up being a way for me to, I guess, get back into learning about Hawaiian culture, or immersing myself in my culture, where I'm from, what defines where I'm from, and how I fit in that conversation. Those are just moments that I want to experience. And then the wet plate is just something I can give back as an offering for allowing me to be in that moment. I think it's fair reciprocity for me to go through that much amount of work on my side. Not that a digital camera is not capable of making a great picture, because it's completely art. I guess it wouldn't have meaning to me if I used a digital camera. I feel like to me it wouldn't seem like a fair trade.
Well, I've known about Kenyatta's work for quite a number of years, and following that, myself and a couple of other curators from the museum visited his studio and talked to him about his work and offered him an exhibition. They're really beautiful works of art themselves, aesthetically wonderful, and the fact that he uses the historical technique of wet plate collodion photography, but really makes it, something that is so relevant to today and speaks to what is happening in Hawaii. He's so interested in that sharing of cultural knowledge with these cultural practitioners that he is meeting and interviewing. They're not only beautiful works of art, but they're so important to the continuation of the culture here in Hawaii.
A lot of the iconic photographs that we have of the royal family and of Hawaiians in everyday life in the 1850s. The people that made those photographs, they weren't authentic. It was almost like they would come here and almost try to like make people look how they wanted them to look. So they put them in like bikini tops and like fake backdrops. Look at the people that live here. Look at the people, and like charge for it money, or just use it to like kind of brag at like, I don't know, like a lunch club. Like look at my exploits and adventures. I went to Samoa, I went to Hawaii, look at these people, look at the women. That's kind of like the stigma of how Hawaii was photographed when this process was like the technology of the time. So I guess in a playful way, I'm kind of like going back in time and like imagining how Hawaiians would have looked if a Hawaiian was making the picture. And it's almost like, I guess, decolonizing photography.
Mahalo for joining us. Because of you, we are able to share these stories. We thank all of you for your continued support. For Home is Here, I'm Kala'i Miller. Ahui ho.